Okay, so we are recording our Zoom event tonight, mostly because we have an awesome special guest, which is my husband again, and I always love hearing his perspective on Plexus, and he always comes up with amazing life application things just when we're talking business, and he's been in business forever and ever. So I'm going to kind of turn it over to him for a couple minutes, and that's why we're recording this, and then I'll jump back in the hot seat, and kind of fill in some of the gaps of what he's talking about. And then I have a couple other points. We're going to record the whole call tonight for everyone so that people who couldn't join can watch it. And I have some points I want to talk about. So I'm going to hand it over to the husband, Dean. If you guys can mute yourselves for the call, that'd be great, because we are recording. Okay, here you go, babe.
Well, hello, everybody. It's good to see you. I can't hear you respond because you're all muted, but it's good to see you. Just what my wife said, I didn't plan this sermon with thinking about Plexus, but as we were talking, I think there's some things that could probably apply, I would think anyway. And so I'm not going to preach it to you. I'm not going to give you all the Plexus analogy to it. Just a few of it. I'm not even going to tell you the whole sermon, just a few things. I'm going to read to you what comes right after Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. So those of you that are already familiar with it, this is basically Jesus' first recorded sermon. It's incredibly long. He preached all day long, and he comes at the end of his sermon. You know, I just want to read you a couple things that he talked about during this whole Sermon on the Mount. It starts with the Beatitudes, you know, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the pure in heart, the peacemakers. Then he talks about the salt and the light. He talks about lust. He talks about anger, talks about divorce, giving to the needy, oaths, retaliation, loving your enemies, giving to the needy, the Lord's Supper, judging others, fasting, laying up treasures in heaven, don't be anxious, and being a tree that bears good fruit, the golden rule, asking will be given to you. So all of these topics he crammed into one massive sermon. So these people, this audience, had been sitting there all day, and at the end of the sermon, he concludes it with this. He says, for all of you, everyone sitting here who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock, and the rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew, beat against that house, and it fell, and the fall was great, and it made a great noise as it crashed to the ground. So anything you read in the Bible that is specifically that Jesus says you can put in this canopy that he puts here, but he's specifically referring to everything that he just said. So he just talked about, you know, fasting and anger and anxiety and all these things, being faithful, asking, seeking, knocking, the golden rule. That's what he's referring to. And I find it interesting that the people he's speaking to are the ones that just listen to his entire sermon. And so as he finishes his sermon, he says, it's not just those of you that heard it. It's not even just those of you that believed it. It's those of you that put it into action. Because if you hear it, that's a good starting place. And if you believe it, that's even better. But if our belief system doesn't define the way that we live, then we don't really believe what we say we believe. And so Jesus is saying the foundation has already been laid. What I just said is the foundation. You don't get to build your foundation. You just get to choose which foundation you get to build upon. And the only way to actually build upon that foundation is by action. It's by taking what I just said and putting it into action. And then I find it very interesting that what Jesus is saying is he's not saying, hey, there's atheists over here and there's Christians over here. He's talking to the same crowd saying, hey, there's a lot of people here that unfortunately have become very self-deceived. They've deceived themselves, believing a lie that because they've heard, therefore they are. And unfortunately, we've all done that. We hear, and therefore we think we are. You know, I could read anything in this to you, and probably anyone on this call could finish the sentence when he talks about fasting. You know, he says, and when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, and their fasting could be seen by others. But truly I say to you, they've received their reward. When you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that fasting may be done in secret, and your Father will reward you. Then ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. Everyone who asks receives. Everyone who seeks finds. We begin to see all these things, and we can probably all regurgitate this information to anyone that needs help. So we could quote scriptures, we could quote verses, and it sounds really good. The problem is that if it hasn't been employed in our own life, what we've done is we've become those people that because we've heard, therefore we are, and we actually haven't built on the foundation that Jesus laid for us. Instead, we've actually gone over to the sand and laid it on the sand. And the scary thing is that what Jesus is talking about is Christians. He's talking about believers that say, I've memorized this, I believe this is true, but because it hasn't taken root in my own life and reflection in the way that I act and do my life, then it shows that I actually haven't built on his foundation. I've just memorized what I should do on his foundation. And when we begin to look at this, we start to say, okay, well then as we look back at the foundation that was laid, we don't get to choose to build the foundation. We just get to choose to build upon the foundation that's already there. So for instance, I just want to give a silly example that there's a saying out there that probably a bunch of you have heard, which is the deeper you dig your foundation, the bigger the building you can build. Did you know that the Twin Towers back on 9/11, when they were taken down by the airplanes, obviously, they were 110 stories tall, but they were 7 stories deep. So in order to build a skyscraper that's 110 stories tall, they still had to dig into the ground, into the foundation, 7 stories deep. So now let's talk a little bit more practical stuff. When Jesus says, hey, just so you know, building on my foundation, building on the sand, or building on any other foundation doesn't protect you from the storms that will come. It doesn't keep the storms from coming, but if you build on my foundation, then it will give you the power to endure the storms when they do come. For those of us that think we've built on his foundation, when the storm comes, unfortunately, we discover that our buildings come to a crashing halt. You know, let's be honest, this is not, I'm not degrading someone that lives in a nice house or not a nice house. What I'm saying is that my parents are from the South. And if you've ever lived in the South, or you know someone from the South, or maybe some of you are in the South, I have no idea. But my parents would always joke, and it's this running gag, that they would say that tornadoes are attracted to trailer parks. And the scary thing is, one of the worst places you can be in a tornado is a trailer park. Why? Because a trailer home has no foundation. It has no chance of surviving a storm, even if it's built really well, even if it's got super nice carpet in it, even if it's got an awesome custom tile shower. The problem is that because it has no foundation, the storm is just going to pick it up from where it is and then blow it somewhere else and probably destroy a bunch of it by the time it sets it down somewhere else. Now, spiritually speaking, this would be a person that doesn't understand why they believe what they believe, and every time the storm blows and the winds come, it just picks them up and it throws them somewhere else that they never thought they would be, but they find themselves in these locations. But then we also have the people that think they've built a foundation on the rock, but it's actually on the sand. And the crazy thing is that these things can be built with great intentions. Doesn't matter if you're building a church, an orphanage, a home, and you can even build a mansion on the sand. It doesn't matter if it's extremely well built, if it's beautiful and gorgeous, and your goal was to build the biggest orphanage in America or Africa or wherever it is. If it doesn't have the right foundation, it's still going to crash when the storms come. And if we don't dig down deep into the right foundation, then it doesn't matter how good you build it. It doesn't matter what your intentions were when you built it. What's going to happen is the storms will come, and all of a sudden we come into this horrific revelation that because we could regurgitate information that might have even been truth, but it hasn't actually taken root in our life, then we begin to discover that everything in our life is going to come to a crashing halt when the big enough storm comes crashing through. And the way that I would do this spiritually, and my wife will teach you this in the Plexus world, is that I begin to look at Jesus' sermon and say, okay, well, I could repeat to you anything that's in the sermon, but I have to ask the question, if this is the foundation that I'm supposed to live out, and by action, I build on the foundation, not by memorizing, but by action, you build on the foundation. Then I have to look at this when he says, hey, and when you fast, and I've got to ask the question of myself, do I fast? Or do I just tell other people what a good idea it is to fast and the benefits that could come from fasting? Because I'll be really honest with you that if there's one thing in this entire sermon that I'm really good at coming up with excuses not to do, is fasting. Because I can say, well, I've got to work. I've got kids to play with. I'm going to go to the gym and I need my protein, whatever it may be. I can come up with some great excuses why I shouldn't fast, while at the same time preaching to everyone else while they should. The scary thing is that means by definition, I'm a hearer only that has memorized it, and therefore I think I am, and I've built on the sand instead of the rock. But I've deceived myself instead of thinking, hey, man, I need to employ this, because the way you build on the foundation is by action. If you don't have the action, then all you've done is memorize the rules or memorize the advice or whatever it may be, and you've built it on the wrong foundation. And you may have even had great intentions. And I want to just stop and say that hearing is a great thing. Believing is a good thing. But the problem is that our belief system only benefits us and the people around us to the degree in which it affects the way we live. I don't care who you are, that'll preach. That's good crap right there. So you move on from that, and now let's say, great, you've built on the right foundation. You just picture a house. Picture the foundation dug deep and this nice, beautiful home built on top of the foundation. Unfortunately, sometimes we build an addition. We say, great, I'm living life the way I'm supposed to. I'm following what Jesus told me to do. I'm building it on the right foundation, and we have the right intentions, the right motives, the right goals. But then every once in a while, we build an addition to the house, and that addition is sitting on a separate foundation. It's sitting on some posts in the ground, and it's attached to the house that's on the right foundation, but it's resting on a separate foundation. You know what we call that foundation? Or this addition? A wound. And I'll just use a very brief example from my own life. The problem with these wounds is that even if we built a house on the right foundation, whenever we have a wound attached to the house that's leaning on a separate foundation, it's going to try and drag that house down with it because it's putting weight on the wrong foundation. And what those wounds will do is this. You know, some of you may know, and it doesn't really matter, but back what feels like a different lifetime ago, I was in a Christian rock band. And I can say this without any kind of weird lifting myself up. I'm just telling you the honest truth. The reason I was in that band was because I love Jesus and I want people to know Jesus. That was my motivation, my goals, my desires. That's the reason. That was my foundation for being in the band. So when it wasn't fun anymore, when it got really hard and we're sleeping on people's couches, I could always rely on the foundation that I had kept me going the right direction. The problem was that I also had a wound, and that wound was unfortunately given to me and enhanced by some friends around me that were extremely verbally abusive. And I had this wound that said, I need to marry a pretty girl. For those of you that don't know, I was married once before, and I was driven to glorify the Lord and driven by this wound to marry a pretty girl to prove to these awful friends that I could, to prove to them that I had some kind of self-worth, to prove to them that maybe if I marry a pretty girl, that would somehow mean that I'm also a good-looking guy. And this wound led me into a relationship that led into a marriage that not only ended horrifically, but it crashed down a bunch of that house that was even built on the right foundation, because it damaged the ministry that God had called me to do. It damaged the relationships around me. Without giving you a lot of details, in less than a year of being married, my ex-wife was cheating on me, having affairs, going to parties, doing all this stuff. It doesn't matter. We reconciled since then. Praise the Lord. But the goal is this. The goal of what I'm saying is this, that because I had a wound that was also attached to the house that was built on the right foundation, I still put weight on the wrong thing that tried to bring that house down and cause residual damage. And for those of us in business, ministry, relationship, life, the foundation, I cannot stress to you enough how important it is to be building on the right foundation. And the way you build on a foundation is not by memorization, it's by action on what you've learned. So for those of us in the Plexus world, that means getting the basics and acting on it. For those of us in the ministry world or just believers in the Lord in general, it means reading the Word of God and employing it in our life, not just memorizing it and regurgitating it, but actually living it out. And that's how we build on the right foundation. The last thing that I'm going to say, and I'm going to turn it over to my wife, is this, that if you are carrying a wound or you don't know that you're carrying a wound, my best advice for you is this. In Luke chapter 4, verse 18, Jesus says this about himself. He's standing in the synagogue, he's preaching a sermon, and he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor and heal the brokenhearted." Now, the thing that I didn't realize back then was that I had a broken heart, a bleeding wound that was affecting my house that I built. Even though the house was on the right foundation, I had a bleeding wound. And I believe that Jesus wants to heal all of our wounds. He wants to heal all of our hearts. Anything that's driving you that isn't of the Lord will eventually distract you from the right foundation and put pressure on the wrong thing. I know a couple people in different network marketing groups that unfortunately they have a couple things that are driving them that are not of the Lord. And even though they would say they have goals and desires to get rich so they can give more to ministry, I know, because I know them very well, that they have wounds that are driving them and attaching in the wrong way. And if they get what they want, it might actually cause a lot of damage to their hearts, their souls, their family, and everybody around them. And so my advice to all of us is to examine our life, whether it's spiritually or business or marriage or whatever it may be, and say, by the actions I perform, not by the knowledge I have memorized, what foundation have I built on? And you can apply that in your spiritual life. You can apply that in the Plexus life. But if you don't have a foundation, or if you've built on the sand, then we know that when the storms come, it's unfortunately not going to last. It's not going to make it. Then as we move on into the world of woundedness that I believe the Lord wants to heal, then the question would be, do we have any wounds? And if we don't know that we have any, I would just encourage you to bring that to the Lord. because you don't want woundedness to drive you in your marriage, your ministry, your business, or any area of your life. Because even if you have stuff that's pretty much on the right foundation, but a couple things leaning this direction, it's only going to lead to hurt and pain down the road. So God bless you guys. Here's the real rock star.
Okay, so you might already be able to like put some of the pieces together. Let's see here. There you all are. Hello, beautiful people. Okay, so you might already be able to put some of the pieces together of what Dean was talking about and how it applies to Plexus. But I had some notes going on from yesterday and from when we were talking, and so let me just make the correlation, because some of you might be sitting there going, what the heck does that have to do with my Plexus business, and why did she have him share that? It's okay if you didn't get it from his perspective, but let me tell you this. So obviously he's talking about foundations, talking about doing stuff. We got to hear it, we got to believe it, we got to do it. We get to build upon a foundation. He said that. We get to build upon a foundation, but we don't always do. We don't always build upon a foundation. Now, your basic Plexus foundation is this. Your basic Plexus foundation is belief in the products and belief in the business, 2, consistently taking the products, and your why. Those ones are already there. Like, that is the foundation that you're going to build from. If you do not have belief in the business or belief in the products or why or consistency with the products, you don't have a foundation at all. You're building on nothing. You're building on the sand, for lack of a better analogy. You're totally building on the sand. And here's how I know, is because if you have belief in the business and you have belief in the products and you're consistently taking the products and you have a strong why, when storms come, like Dean was talking about, when doubt comes in your mind, or when people reject Plexus or say, no, I don't want that, or they say, can't believe you're a part of a pyramid scheme, or they, criticize supplements because we don't need supplements, we can get our nutrition from food. You will be shaken, and you will have nowhere to go, and you will probably freak out and be like, I can't do this anymore. Oh my gosh, I need a break, and freak out. But if you have been consistent with the products, if you have strong belief in the company and in the products, and you have a strong why, and you're built from that, when those storms come and when those people mock you and when they write nasty comments on your Facebook posts and when they reject you and say no or they unfriend you, that won't shake you. You'll just say, okay, they're lost, and keep moving forward. That's how this works, and this is how it all correlates. So you guys have to build upon that foundation. So if you're taking notes, which I hope you are, I have it all written down, so you can ask me for it later. But your Plexus foundation, let me go over it again, is consistency with the products, belief in the business and products, and your why. How do you build upon that? Dean already said you have to know those things and believe them and then do, which the action to build upon that, here's how you build upon that rock solid foundation. You attend trainings, you find events in your area, you go to those events, you do trainings on YouTube. You guys, I didn't know anything when I started with Plexus. I knew nothing. I knew nothing about the products. I literally copied and pasted a long, really obnoxious script to my potentials, and they probably never read it, that I hardly even knew what it said because it was so long and so detailed, that I just found from a page. And how I learned about Plexus and how I learned about the products and how I learned about the business was going on YouTube. And I just watched videos, and you know how YouTube, watch one and there's 17 suggestions that go along with it. I just video hopped and watched trainings. And then I would go and find these people making the trainings on Facebook, and I'd follow them so I could see what they're posting about Facebook. And then I would share their posts. And that's how I started. That was the action, one of the actions for me. The next, set of actions that you can build upon your foundation to, create your Plexus house, your Plexus business, would be doing IPA, income producing activity every day, doing something that has the potential to produce income every single day, whether that's reaching out to one person on Facebook or 3 people on Facebook or 5 people or 10 or 20 or whatever, doing something every day that has the potential to produce income. The next thing to build upon your foundation is community. Being active in the group pages that you're all a part of on Facebook. Being a part of the community of Plexus is going to boost your belief. I can guarantee it. I know a few of you guys have been able to either do a video chat or meet Wendy Larson, who is our Diamond Upline and dear friend of mine, have been able to meet her in real life. And I can guarantee, without even asking any of you, that if you've met Wendy and talked to her for 5 minutes, whether it was about Plexus or life or whatever, I can guarantee you walked away and without realizing it, your belief in Plexus shot through the roof. Like, I can guarantee you, because you were invited into that community. Because I know Wendy, and I know that if she met you, she was kind, she was generous, she was gracious, she was encouraging to you. And so I know that all of those things equal belief being built. And so being involved in community, going to events, a lot of you guys went to the Super Saturday events in January, and a lot of you guys got to meet different Diamonds, presenters, or hosts at these events, have your picture taken with them. You walk away and subconsciously your belief went through the roof without you even realizing it. And so being involved in the community, if I add you and if I ask you and then add you to a group chat, be involved, ask questions, whatever. I'm not doing that just to check something off my list. I'm doing it for your benefit. And then the next part is leading, passing on that foundation to your team members, to people who you meet to bring into Plexus, passing on the foundation of the belief in the business and the products, taking your products consistently and having a strong why. Now, a shaky foundation, the sand foundation that Dean was talking about, is going to be shaky belief in all of those things. And it's going to be, upon that, you can build with inconsistency with the products. You can build with, you can't build very much on your shaky foundation, because I can guarantee you, if you have a shaky foundation, or if you've built your house of Plexus on the sand, you're probably not taking action, because I don't know very many people in Plexus who don't have a strong belief that actually do anything. And that's just the truth of it. Now, Dean was talking a little bit at the end about, building an addition. And I like to think of that as building your team. And he talked about having wounds. And if you guys have, how did I write this down? Okay, your wounds cannot define your why. Your wounds cannot define your why. When I first started pursuing the Plexus business, it was just 2 years ago. I was in a group that Wendy and Ruthie and Rachel were leading, and it was super intense. We had to read a book a week and do all these crazy IPAs and watch all these insane videos every day. It was insane, you guys. It was so intense, and I was not ready for it at all. And I was in this group, and when they asked us to define our why, my why at that point was defined by a wound. My why was based on proving something to someone and showing them that I was right and being correct and being, it was based out of competitive nature, and it was based out of a nature to prove something to someone. That is not necessarily wrong, but if it's based out of a wound, it's not going to get you very far. And I can guarantee you that if your goal in Plexus is to prove something to someone, it will not last long, and it will be when those storms come and when those people rise up against you, you're going to have a hard time standing, because proving something to someone will only get you so far. It won't get you out of bed every morning to do something. You guys have heard me talk 100 times about my vision board and the things that drive me to do Plexus. They are, now it is not about proving this to anyone. If the people that I wanted to prove something to get to see my life when I'm a emerald or sapphire or diamond, and they get to see my Lexus, I won't care. And if they never get to see it, I won't care. Like, it won't matter to me anymore, because my why is not based on proving something to them. My why is based on the things that I know that will last and that will go further and do more. And so that is why having a solid why is so important. And when you're building a team or building that addition that's, separate from the house, you have to make sure that that is also not built on a shaky foundation. When you bring in team members, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit in a minute, separate from what Dean was talking about, but if you bring in team members and you have lies that you believe about yourself, I'm not worthy, I'm not worth it, I can't do this, this is too hard, only smart people get to diamond, only pretty people get to diamond, you have to be so fancy to get to diamond, if you don't have a gold star on your belly button, you're never going to get to diamond. That's a Dr. Seuss joke. But you guys, I had a lot of those lies living in my head when I first started 2 years ago in the business. I had tons of lies that I believed about myself. And I was trying to build a team with those lies living in my head. And guess what happened? Not a lot. I had people sign up and people quit, and people sign up and people quit. You know why? It's because there's this thing in leadership called the law of magnetism and the law of attraction. And I was not very attractive and I was not very magnetic, because I was trying to live from these lies, and instead of dispelling the lies in my head, I was trying to live through them. And that did not work very well. And therefore I had tons of people join and tons of people quit, because they could feel my unbelief and they could tell that I wasn't building on a rock solid foundation of, yes, I believe 100% in this business and this company. I believe 100% in these products, and I have a strong why. So once your why gets strong, some of your wounds will probably naturally start to heal. And some of the lies you believe about yourself. That is why I'm always encouraging personal growth. That is why I'm always talking about reading personal growth books, is because it matters to get your head and your heart and your character in the right place so that you can continue to grow in this business.